After years of being criticized for my so-called pointless career, Dad looked me dead in the eye and said, "From now on, you'll pay rent." So I packed my stuff and left. A few days later, Mom texted me, "Rent's due. Where are you?" I ignored it. And you won't believe what they did next. Sup Reddit. My parents trashed my career for years, so I moved out. Then they came chasing me for rent money. When I didn't cave, they went nuclear. Here's how it all played out. Grab your popcorn, because this one's a ride. I'm Drew, 28, male. And honestly, I've spent most of my adult life being treated like a defective piece of lumber by my own family. See, when you grow up in a house where everything revolves around custom carpentry, your entire existence gets judged on whether you can swing a hammer properly and fall in line with Dad's footsteps. My old man, Bobby, started his carpentry business back in the 90s, building high-end kitchen cabinets and fancy furniture for rich folks around town. He acts like he personally invented measure twice, cut once. And whenever you mention anything outside his bubble, he gives you this look. Like you just told him you want to pay rent money by juggling bowling pins. Then there's my mom, Celeste. She's the queen of passive-aggressive crap. She's perfected this act where she sighs dramatically and wrings her hands during family arguments, making these wounded bird noises like she's the one suffering through everyone else's problems. And of course, my younger brother Mason, the golden child. He joined the family carpentry business right out of high school because, apparently, thinking for yourself wasn't on his to-do list. Bobby treats him like he personally discovered wood grain. Constant praise, endless bragging about his natural instincts. Me. I've been working with metal since I was 17. Started out welding exhaust pipes in my buddy's garage for gas money. Then I moved into custom railings, decorative pieces, and eventually full fabrication projects for local businesses. I built my skills from scratch, invested in real equipment, and carved out a lane where I actually make solid money. Everything from custom steel staircases to industrial shelving systems. But according to Bobby, metal work is cold and soulless compared to the warmth and character of wood. Never mind that my steel and aluminum projects take just as much precision and artistry as anything he makes. Sunday dinners? Straight-up mind games with gravy. Bobby would sit at the head of the table, carving meat like he was planning my execution, dropping comments about real trades and serious work. Celeste would heap food on everyone's plates while throwing me those martyr looks, like I was personally destroying the family legacy. And Mason. He'd just bask in the praise, tossing in little digs about my hobby phase. Meanwhile, I was living in this converted garage apartment behind their house, a studio space they fixed up when I graduated trade school. They called it temporary, which in their language meant, until you give up and join us. Getting established, in their eyes, meant abandoning everything I'd built for myself. Thing is, I wasn't struggling. I had steady clients, repeat customers, decent income from gates, fabrication projects, you name it. I covered my truck payment, equipment, materials, and still saved money. The only thing I wasn't paying was rent, because they insisted family helps family while you find your footing. What they really meant was, we'll support you until you finally admit we were right and give up this metal nonsense. Every finished project, every happy customer, every check I cashed, dismissed as me just getting lucky or messing around with scraps. Bobby would acknowledge my income, then dismiss it in the same breath as unsustainable. This had been boiling for months. Little digs at dinner about real trades. Side comments about growing up. Questions about my long-term plans, which was just code for, when are you finally joining our business? I got used to just nodding and letting it wash over me, because arguing with Bobby was pointless. I thought if I just kept quiet, worked hard, and slowly proved myself, they'd eventually respect what I did. Looking back now, that was the dumbest thing I ever believed. Because the truth? It was never about craftsmanship, success, or even money. It was always about control. That garage apartment kept me close enough for them to yank the leash whenever they felt like it, while pretending I was independent. And I didn't realize how fast they were about to pull it tight. The night everything changed started like any other Sunday dinner from hell. Bobby at the head of the table, soaring through his steak. Celeste sighing her way through martyr theater. Mason scrolling on his phone. I was just trying to eat my food and sneak back to my shop. I had a big project due Monday, a custom steel and aluminum reception desk for a downtown law firm. But Bobby has this radar for when I'm checked out. He looked up and went, "So, Drew, any real work lined up this week, or just more playing with scrap metal?" Here we go. "It's not scrap metal," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm finishing a commercial project. Custom reception desk, built-in cable management, powder-coated finish. The client's paying me $4,000 for 2 weeks' work." Bobby snorted. $4,000 for bending some metal bars? You know what real money looks like? Repeat customers. Referrals. Building something that lasts generations. You're just making fancy junk that'll get replaced in 5 years. Then Mason jumped in, because watching me get roasted wasn't enough for him. Dad's right. Anyone can weld some metal together. Real woodworking takes skill. He had that smug little grin that made me want to put him through a wall. That's when Bobby leaned back, crossed his arms, and dropped the line that changed everything. Same look he used when grounding me as a kid, except I was 28, not 15. "All right," he said. "From now on, you'll cover your own rent. No more freebies. You want to play metal worker? Then act like a real businessman. Rent's due at the end of the week." The whole room went dead quiet. Celeste shifted in her seat, staring everywhere but at me. Mason froze, realizing this wasn't his usual entertainment anymore. I just sat there. Because this wasn't about rent. I probably made more in a week than Mason did in a month. This was about breaking me down until I gave up and joined their little woodchip empire. And in moments like that, you've got 2 choices. Argue and fuel the fire, or stay calm and move in silence. I picked option 2. "Okay," I said, and went back to eating. Bobby looked thrown. He'd clearly been gearing up for a fight, ready to lecture me about responsibility. Instead, I finished my meal, helped clear the table like always, and excused myself. "Have a good night," I said, then walked back to my apartment like nothing had changed. But in my head, everything had changed. I wasn't angry. I was done. Done chasing approval from people who'd already stamped me as worthless. Done explaining myself to someone who'd made up his mind years ago. That night, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by half-finished projects, the smell of metal and welding gas heavy in the air, and thought about what had just happened. Bobby hadn't just asked for rent. He'd given me an ultimatum. Fall in line or get cut off. He probably thought a week of rent panic would have me crawling back, ready to swap my plasma cutter for a circular saw and a lecture on honest work. What he didn't realize was that he'd just freed me from the last tie holding me to their dysfunction. By the time I'd finished cleaning my equipment that night, I already knew what I was going to do. I was going to leave quietly, completely, and permanently. The very next morning, while the house was dead quiet, I started packing. Everything that actually mattered to me fit into my truck and a small trailer I borrowed from my buddy Alan. The whole process felt like shedding skin. Every single box I packed was another layer of distance between me and their endless disappointment. By the time Bobby was getting ready for work, I was gone. No note. No goodbye. No forwarding address. I just locked up that garage apartment and drove away from the only home I'd ever known. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. I found a small industrial unit across town. 12,200 square feet, good ventilation, solid power, and plenty of space for all my equipment. The landlord, Hector, didn't care about family drama. He just wanted rent paid on time. Honestly, that was a relief. That first week, I focused on nothing but setting up my shop and catching up on client work. Having my own space with my own rules was incredible. No more working around Bobby's workshop schedule. No more Mason's snide comments about real craftsmanship. Just me, my tools, and the sound of my work. My productivity shot through the roof. It felt like I'd been working all these years with someone constantly criticizing every move I made, and suddenly there was silence. I didn't reach out to them. They didn't reach out to me. For about 10 days I started to think maybe that was it. Maybe they'd just write me off as the family disappointment and move on. Bobby could have his perfect little carpentry dynasty with Mason. Celeste could quit pretending to be caught in the middle. And I could finally build my business without being constantly undermined. I should have known better. People like Bobby don't let go of control. The first text came on a Wednesday morning while I was cutting steel plate for a custom staircase. Just a short message from Celeste. The rent is due. Where are you? I stared at that text for a solid minute and actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of the sheer audacity. Where was I? Better question. Where the hell were they when I was growing up and actually needed parents instead of critics? But that text told me everything I needed to know about how they saw me. In their minds, I hadn't moved out. I just wandered off, temporarily. Like a dog that would eventually come home when it got hungry enough. So, I didn't respond. I set the phone down and went back to work. But the messages didn't stop. First, did you forget what day it is? Then, your father is expecting you to handle your responsibilities. And finally, we can't carry dead weight anymore. Time to step up. That last one made me pause. Step up. The same phrase they'd been using to manipulate me since high school. When I didn't want to spend my weekends working in Bobby's shop. Step up, son. When I chose metalwork classes instead of advanced woodworking. Step up. When I told them I was starting my own business. Step up and stop being selfish. I left those messages unanswered for a couple of days, hoping they'd finally get the hint. But Bobby and Celeste don't take hints. They escalate. Saturday afternoon, my phone rang. Mason. Where the heck are you? No hello. No how's business going? I'm working, I said flatly. You're supposed to pay rent. Dad's ticked off and frankly so am I. You can't just disappear and expect everyone else to cover for your nonsense. I don't live there anymore, I said. I moved out. I have my own shop now. Silence. Then his laugh, that condescending little chuckle he's perfected over the years. You think you can just walk away? This family doesn't work that way, Drew. You don't just get to bail when things get tough. Tough for who, Mason? I snapped. You're living rent-free in the main house. You're being handed a business that's already successful. Dad praises you every chance he gets. Don't tell me you're the one struggling here. That's not the point, he snapped back. You think you're so much better than us with your fancy projects? You're still part of this family whether you like it or not. Dad says if you don't get your act together, don't bother coming back. I hung up. Didn't say another word. My hands were shaking when I set the phone down. Not from fear but pure rage. The nerve of these people. They'd spent years making it crystal clear I didn't measure up. And now that I'd finally accepted that and pulled myself out of their mess, suddenly I'm the problem? The messages kept pouring in throughout the week. Celeste laying on the guilt. Your brother is working extra hours while you run away. Is that fair to him? Bobby throwing jabs. If you can't handle adult responsibilities, don't expect to be treated like an adult. And then the one that really got under my skin. If you're not paying rent, we'll have to cover it ourselves. Don't forget, that's money we've invested in you for years. You owe us. You owe us. So that's what it was. Not family. Not support. Not love. Just a loan, with interest. And now they wanted to collect by dragging me back into their control. That's when I started to wonder. Did they even know I'd moved out? Or was this just another game to yank me back in line? Maybe they thought I was hiding somewhere nearby, waiting for them to forgive me. But then Bobby showed up at my shop. And I got my answer. It was Thursday evening. I was welding supports for a custom gate when I heard heavy footsteps outside. I glanced out the window, and my stomach dropped. Bobby, standing in my lot, arms crossed, wearing his work clothes and that same expression that used to terrify me as a kid. I killed the welder and stepped outside, keeping the doorway between us. No way was I letting him in my workspace. Drew, he said, voice low and controlled. We need to talk. About what? I asked, though I already knew. You know darn well what. The rent situation. The disrespect you've shown this family. This little tantrum of yours ends now. I don't live there anymore, I said, steady and calm. I moved out. I have my own place now. That should be exactly what you wanted. Me standing on my own. He shook his head like I'd just said the dumbest thing imaginable. That apartment was provided for you as family support. You don't just walk away from family obligations without consequences. Your mother and I aren't going to subsidize your little rebellion. Something inside me snapped, like a cable finally hitting its breaking point. Maybe you shouldn't have treated family support like a leash, I shot back. His eyes narrowed, and for a second I thought he might actually swing at me. Watch your mouth, Drew. You've been ungrateful long enough. This little stunt, running off, ignoring your responsibilities, it stops now. He stepped closer. For a moment I thought he might force his way in, but he stopped just short of the doorway. We just stared each other down. Nearly 3 decades of resentment boiling between us. I don't know what game you think you're playing, Bobby said finally, his tone sharp, clipped. But you don't just get to disappear and dump the consequences on your family. That apartment comes with responsibilities, and you're going to honor them whether you like it or not. I folded my arms, mirroring his stance. I didn't dump anything on anyone. I moved out and started paying my own way. Isn't that what you always said you wanted? You don't get it. His voice rose, hand slicing the air. This isn't about independence. It's about respect. About honoring your commitments to this family. That apartment wasn't charity. It was an investment. And investments come with expectations. That word, investment, lodged in my brain like a splinter. There had never been investment in me as a person. Only in me as a potential asset for their plans. I never asked for that apartment, I said, quieter now but still firm. You put me there. You said it was to help me get started. Now that I have gotten started, you're acting like I owe you for the privilege. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping into that dangerous tone. You do owe us. Every meal, every ride, every dime we ever spent trying to set you straight. You think any of that came free? We invested in you, Drew, and all you've done is throw it back in our faces. Behind him, I caught some movement in a car parked across the street. Celeste's silhouette was there, sitting just far enough away not to be obvious but close enough to watch. She was probably taking notes for later. Why are you really here? I asked. His face hardened. Because if you think you can just walk away from your obligations, you're dead wrong. That rent is due, and you're going to pay it one way or another. The way he said one way or another made it clear. This wasn't a request. I thought about all the times as a kid when he'd used his size and his voice to win arguments, filling up every corner of the room until there wasn't space left for disagreement. That's how I learned to nod, to agree, to make myself smaller, because fighting back always made things worse. But I wasn't 12 anymore. I'm not paying rent for a place I don't live, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And you don't get to show up at my business and threaten me. That's not how this works anymore. He studied me for a long moment. The silence stretched. Finally, he stepped back, adjusting his jacket, though his eyes didn't soften. All right. You'll regret this, he said, flat and cold. You'll find out real quick you can't make it without family support. And when you come crawling back, don't expect us to be waiting with open arms. With that, he turned and walked back to where Celeste was waiting in the car. He didn't look back, but I knew this wasn't over. When I went back inside my shop, my hands were shaking slightly. I'd stood up to him, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like I'd just declared war on those people. And I was right to be worried, because what came next was worse than anything I could have imagined. For the next few days, I waited for the other shoe to drop. The messages started again, but this time they were different. More manipulative, more desperate. Celeste was handling the psychological warfare now, probably because Bobby realized his direct approach had backfired. Your father is devastated. Please just pay the rent and come home where you belong. Don't abandon your family over pride. Drew, we raised you better than this. Think about your brother. This is putting so much stress on him. Why make things harder for Mason? When I didn't respond, she escalated. 2 days later, I found an envelope slipped under my shop door when I arrived for work. My stomach sank when I saw the familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter written in Celeste's careful script, but the words were pure Bobby. Drew, this is your final warning. If you continue to ignore your family obligations, we will be forced to take action. You are part of this family whether you accept it or not, and that comes with responsibilities you cannot simply abandon. Consider this your last chance to do the right thing before we're forced to pursue other options. Other options. They were already planning. I found out what those options were when my phone rang during lunch. It was Hector, my landlord. Drew, I wanted to give you a heads up about something, he said, sounding confused and annoyed. Your father stopped by this morning. Said he was here on your behalf, asking questions about your lease, your payment history, whether you'd been having any problems. I didn't give him any information, of course, but I thought you should know. My blood went cold. He was trying to interfere with my business relationships. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was him actively trying to sabotage my livelihood. And that was just the beginning. It got worse. Over the next week, I started getting strange calls. Potential clients who'd seemed interested suddenly canceled consultations. A supplier questioned my creditworthiness for no apparent reason. Small things, but together they added up to a pattern. Then Alan, my buddy who'd helped me move, called with some disturbing news. Hey man, weird question, but has your family been asking around about you? Because my cousin works at the bank, and she said some older guy came in asking about your business account. Claimed to be your father, said he was worried about your financial situation. That's when I realized my father wasn't just trying to control me anymore. He was actively trying to destroy what I'd built. The next incident was the final straw. I was working late on a custom railing project when I heard vehicles outside. I looked out and saw 2 trucks in my parking area. Bobby's work truck and Mason's pickup. They weren't just visiting. Mason was taking pictures of my shop, my equipment, even my customers' materials. Bobby was writing notes on a clipboard, like he was conducting some kind of inspection. I walked outside, and the look on Bobby's face was pure satisfaction, like he'd been waiting for this moment. What the heck are you doing? I asked. Documenting safety violations, Bobby said calmly. You're running a business out of an industrial space that may not be properly zoned for metalworking. Someone should probably report that to the city, Mason smirked, still taking pictures. Also, looks like you might not have proper permits for some of this equipment. That plasma cutter looks pretty industrial for this area. My hands clenched into fists. Now they were threatening to use code enforcement and zoning regulations to shut down my business. Not because I was actually violating anything. I'd checked all that before I signed the lease. Get off my property, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Now. Bobby stepped closer, that satisfied smile never leaving his face. This is what happens when you try to bite the hand that fed you, son. You're not as independent as you think you are. Predictable. I'd challenged his authority publicly, proven I could succeed without him. And now he was going to make sure I paid for that humiliation. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd escalated from family drama to criminal harassment. And unlike family dynamics, the law was pretty clear about this kind of behavior. So, I pulled out my phone and started recording. I'm asking you one more time to leave my property, I said clearly, making sure the camera caught their faces. You're trespassing and interfering with my business. His smile faltered when he saw the camera. Mason stopped taking pictures, suddenly looking less confident. You can't threaten us, Bobby said, but his voice had lost some of its authority. Put the dang phone down. I'm not threatening anyone, I replied, still recording. I'm documenting harassment and trespassing. Keep it up, and this video goes straight to the police. They left, but not before Bobby made one final threat. This isn't over, Drew. You have no idea what you've started. He was right about one thing. It wasn't over. But what he didn't realize was that I had just gained the upper hand. Because everything they did from this point forward was going to be documented, recorded, and used against them. He wanted to play hardball, fine. But he'd picked a fight with someone who had everything to protect. After their little trespassing stunt, I knew I needed to get serious about protecting myself. They weren't just mad, they were trying to tank my shop. I called my buddy Diego, who'd been running his own auto shop for about 10 years. He'd dealt with family drama that turned ugly when he left his father's garage. "Dude, you need to document everything," Diego told me over coffee that weekend. "Every text, every phone call, every time they show up at your place. And you need security cameras. Yesterday. Trust me, these family business feuds can get really nasty, really fast." He was right. I spent the next day installing cameras around my shop. Front entrance, parking area, equipment storage. I was going to have evidence of every move they made. The cameras turned out to be a good move. 2 days later, they caught Mason driving slowly past my shop during business hours, taking pictures with his phone. The next morning, I got a call from a potential client saying they'd heard concerning things about my business practices and wanted to cancel their consultation. When I pressed for details, they mentioned someone had called claiming to be a former customer with complaints about my work quality and professionalism. The description they gave matched Bobby perfectly. That afternoon, the City Code Enforcement Office called. "Mr. Drew, we've received a complaint about your business operation. Someone reported potential zoning violations and unpermitted equipment. We'll need to schedule an..." I wasn't worried about the inspection. Everything was properly permitted and zoned. But I knew the real goal wasn't about codes, it was about wasting my time, costing me money, and making me look unprofessional in front of clients. And while I was tied up dealing with city bureaucrats, my father was getting bolder. The cameras caught him and Mason doing what looked like surveillance on my shop, sitting in the parking lot across the street for hours at a time. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The breaking point came one morning when I arrived at work and found my shop's front window covered in spray paint. In big ugly red letters, someone had written, "Scam artist and cheats customers" across the glass. But the cameras had caught it all. Bobby's truck pulling up at 2 a.m. Mason stepping out with a spray can. The entire vandalism incident recorded in perfect detail. That's when I called Detective Maria Cruz. Diego had recommended her. She specialized in business-related harassment cases. "This has escalated beyond family drama," Detective Cruz said after going through the footage. "This is harassment and vandalism. We can get you protection." She walked me through the process of filing complaints and applying for protective orders. The paperwork was extensive, but every incident I documented, every threatening message, every act of sabotage, was building an airtight legal case. Meanwhile, my business was suffering. The constant harassment ate away at time I should have been spending with clients. Potential customers were being scared off by Bobby's campaign of lies. I was pouring money into lawyers instead of new equipment. But then something unexpected happened. Support started rolling in. Word got around town about what was happening, and other small business owners began reaching out. Alan introduced me to Dylan Wrangler, who ran a successful electrical contracting business. "The thing about family business tyrants," Dylan told me, "is they can't stand seeing someone succeed outside their control. It threatens everything they believe about themselves." He became an unofficial mentor, giving me advice on how to grow despite the family drama. He even started sending clients my way, which helped offset the damage Bobby's sabotage campaign had caused. But things were still getting uglier. The final straw came when I discovered Bobby had been contacting my suppliers, spreading lies about my financial stability, trying to get my credit accounts frozen. One of my steel suppliers called to warn me. "Drew, someone claiming to be your father called, saying you were having financial problems and might not be able to pay your bills. I know you've always been good for payment, but I thought you should know someone's trying to damage your reputation." That's when it clicked. Bobby's endgame was clear. If he couldn't control me, he was going to make sure I failed completely. The next morning, I filed for emergency restraining orders against both Bobby and Mason. Detective Cruz had helped me prepare a comprehensive case file, documenting months of escalating harassment, stalking, vandalism, and business interference. The court date was set for the following week. Bobby and Mason would be served with papers ordering them to stay away from me, my business, and anyone connected to my work. But Bobby had one last card to play, and it was worse than anything I had imagined. 2 days before the court hearing, I showed up at my shop to find the front door ajar. Someone had broken in during the night. But it wasn't a typical burglary. Nothing was stolen. My equipment had been sabotaged. Welding cables cut. Computer files deleted. Project materials contaminated with metal shavings. The security cameras had been spray painted over, but not before catching a glimpse of Mason's truck in the parking lot around midnight. This was my father's final message. And it was a big mistake, because now I had enough evidence to put them both behind bars. The family war was over. Now it was time for consequences. The morning of the restraining order hearing, I showed up with a tabbed binder. Detective Cruz had helped me organize everything. Photographs, video footage, documented phone calls, witness statements, financial records showing the damage to my business. Every piece of evidence told the same story. A systematic campaign of harassment designed to destroy my livelihood. Bobby and Mason arrived with their own lawyer, some expensive suit who probably specialized in making rich men's problems disappear. But you can't lawyer your way out of video evidence and police reports. The hearing was one-sided. Their lawyer tried spinning it as a family dispute gone wrong, painting Bobby as just a concerned parent worried about my financial stability. The judge took one look at the security footage of Mason spray painting my shop window, and Bobby conducting surveillance of my business, and that narrative died faster than a mosquito in a bug zapper. When she saw the police report documenting the break-in and sabotage, it was game over. Bobby's face went white as paper. Mason looked like he was about to throw up. Their fancy lawyer scribbled notes like his career depended on it. The judge barred them from contacting me, kept them 500 feet from my home and shop, banned them from reaching out to clients or suppliers or even mentioning me online, and warned that any slip would mean immediate arrest. But here's the best part. She also ordered them to pay full restitution for my damaged equipment and lost business income. Nearly 15 grand in total, plus my legal fees. Beautiful. Bobby looked like someone had just told him his precious workshop had burned down. Mason actually did look sick at that point. The fallout was swift and brutal. Word spread through town faster than gossip at a church potluck. The story of the family carpentry business that tried to destroy their own son's metal workshop didn't exactly make them look sympathetic. Their longtime clients started asking uncomfortable questions about doing business with people who resorted to criminal harassment and vandalism. Within 2 weeks, they'd lost 3 major commercial accounts. One was a high-end kitchen remodeling contract worth about $40,000. Another was ongoing work with a local property management company that had been steady income for nearly a decade. Mason got himself arrested exactly 12 days after the restraining order was issued. The idiot drove past my shop during business hours. Thought he was too clever, but my cameras caught everything. And I had Detective Cruz on speed dial. He spent 3 days in county lockup, plus another 30 days tacked on for contempt of court. Meanwhile, Celeste was working overtime to salvage their reputation. She reached out through every mutual connection we had, old neighbors, distant relatives, people from church, anyone she thought might convince me to work things out and drop the legal proceedings. The woman had guts, I'll give her that. But there was no working things out. They'd crossed every line and burned every bridge. Bobby held out longer than Mason, but eventually took a plea deal on the felony charges rather than risk a trial where all their dirty laundry would end up public record. Smart move, considering the mountain of evidence stacked against him. While their world was crumbling, mine was taking off like a rocket. The whole situation had generated local publicity. Dylan Wrangler started actively referring clients to me, telling them I was the guy who wouldn't be pushed around and delivered quality work no matter what. Diego spread the word in the automotive community that I was the metal worker to call for custom fabrication projects. But the real game changer came when a reporter interviewed me in my shop, showing off a custom steel staircase I'd built for a local architect and a set of decorative railings headed for a luxury home development. After that, my phone wouldn't stop ringing with new project inquiries. I had to hire a part-time assistant just to handle scheduling and client communications because I couldn't keep up while still doing the fabrication work myself. 6 months later, I moved into a larger facility with better equipment and more space. The new shop was 3,000 square feet in a light industrial complex, with overhead cranes, proper ventilation, and room for the CNC plasma cutter I'd been saving for. The rent was triple what I'd been paying, but the work coming in easily justified it. I also hired Brian, a young guy fresh out of trade school who reminded me a lot of myself at that age. Having an assistant meant I could take on bigger projects and focus on complex fabrication instead of constantly answering phones and chasing invoices. Meanwhile, Bobby and Mason's carpentry business was circling the drain. Their reputation was completely ruined. Mason was working alone most days, trying to handle jobs that really needed two people. Bobby's legal troubles and the financial hit from restitution payments had forced them to turn down several major contracts because they couldn't afford the upfront. I heard through Alan that Celeste was pressuring Bobby to sell the business and retire early. The stress of everything was showing on him. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in just the past 6 months. Mason wasn't doing any better. He looked constantly worn out, like the pressure of trying to keep the business afloat was hanging over him every day. Their workshop, which used to employ 4 guys during the busy seasons, was now just Bobby and Mason, scraping by on projects that barely covered their overhead costs. The irony was almost too perfect. For years, they'd told me I'd never amount to anything. And now here I was, out earning their entire operation while working half the hours. But honestly, the most satisfying part wasn't watching their business collapse. It was the fact that I had proven, without a doubt, that everything they'd ever said about me was total garbage. They'd sworn I couldn't succeed without their help, that I'd never build anything worthwhile outside of their little kingdom. Yet here I was, running something bigger, more profitable, and far more respected than anything they had ever managed to achieve. I never spoke to them again, and I never wanted to. The restraining orders were still in place, and I had zero intention of lifting them. As far as I was concerned, Bobby, Celeste, and Mason had died to me the moment they decided to try destroying my business instead of just leaving me alone. The best revenge, folks, is simple. Burn bridges when you need to and move on. Life is good. Oh, and YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube, this video deserves to blow up.